One of those questions that we received after last week's episode was common mistakes to avoid if I'm going to file a bankruptcy. What should I look for? Well, one of the biggest things that we see is we see people waiting too long. Bankruptcy allows you property exemptions in the state of Florida for things like IRAs, 401ks, annuities, things of that nature. Oftentimes, people don't come see us until they've already gone through all the money that was in their retirement account. And now they have no money in their IRA. They're facing a tax liability because of the fact that they withdrew their IRA early, and they still have debt because they can't afford the payments, or it's been so hard to find employment in this job economy. That's the biggest mistake I think I see in probably 50 to 60% of the people that come through the door. They've waited too long to seek help. Bankruptcy isn't the stigmatism that it used to be. You heard Mr. Dellutri in that last commercial talk about Walt Disney and Thomas Jefferson and some of the other people that have filed bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is not about just getting rid of your debts. It's about getting a fresh start. It's about being better 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road than you are now. If we do our job at the Dellutri Law Group the best, we're going to put you in a better position 5 years from now than you are today. That's what we strive for all our clients. Nothing makes us happier than to have a client 5 or 6 years down the road say, wow, that was a real turning point for me. I got out from under that heavy burden and I was able to get my life back on track. It's one of the most rewarding things to see when a client has that reaction. One of the second things that we see, and not so much in this economy, but just in general, is when people take out additional loans to try to pay off some of their debt. They look and say, well, I take a cash advance on this credit card to pay this credit card, and I'm going to balance transfer this credit card to that credit card, or maybe I'm going to borrow a personal loan from somebody. Those are things that all that does is move the debt from one person to another. It may have a lower interest rate for a period of time, but at the end of the day, you still have the same amount of total debt. That situation's not going to get you into a better position going forward. Some of the other things that we see is reaffirming debt that is burdensome. Maybe you had that car payment that was $600 or $700 a month, and you say, well, I have to have a car, so I'm going to reaffirm my car debt. A lot of times it's about getting in a budget. And while you may not drive the same type of car, you still may be able to drive a reliable car for less money so that you can get your budget back on track. A couple of the things that we list as kind of our do's and don'ts when you're thinking about a bankruptcy. One of the main things is not paying back loans to friends or family members before you file. Even though we all have those emotional strings and those emotional attachments to our family members, and we don't want to let them down, oftentimes paying back a friend or family member before filing bankruptcy can cause more problems than if you had just said, look, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pay you back sometime in the future. Remember, just because you owed money before a bankruptcy doesn't mean you can't pay that money back to a friend or family member after you file bankruptcy, after you've gotten back on your feet and you have the money. A loving family member will always understand the situation that you're going through and allow you to pay them back later. Paying them back before may actually bring your family members into the bankruptcy case and cause a bigger problem. The other thing I see is people wanting to transfer their assets and say, I have to keep my car, so I'm going to transfer this asset out of my name. That's another thing that should be avoided at all costs. Typically what you're doing is you're creating what they call a fraudulent transfer because you just transferred it so that you could keep it. Here in the state of Florida, the bankruptcy exemptions allow you to protect $5,000 in personal property and $1,000 worth of equity in a vehicle if you're not keeping your homestead. If you are keeping your homestead, then you get to protect $1,000 worth of personal property and $1,000 worth of equity in a vehicle. Now, if the property that you hold, like a car that's worth $10,000, rather than transferring it, maybe the best option is to file a Chapter 13, where you're going to get to keep the car and you're just going to have to account for it by making payments to the creditors. This is a much more desirable situation than having to turn and say, well, I transferred this car to somebody else, and now the trustee is suing your friend who you transferred the car to, and the trustee has the car at the end of the day. this is the situation that you were trying to avoid in the first place. You just have to make sure that you keep your car, account for the value, and seek counsel to determine whether or not you can keep that in a Chapter 7, or perhaps you should be examining a Chapter 13.